What's up, everybody? This is Ruben here with another video, 60 vids in 60 days. Tell me what you guys think in the comments, all that good stuff. Like, subscribe. I'm going to talk about UFC talk today. UFC talk. We're going to talk about this whole situation with Fight Island in Abu Dhabi, the United Arab Emirates of America. This whole idea that we're going to be fighting in this mythical place here where, you know, UFC 251 and so forth. There's going to be a couple of fights there. There's going to be 4 fights there. UFC 251 is going to be what I want to talk about. But I'm going to talk about that. But I'm also going to talk about this idea of all these fighters retiring, right? Why are people retiring? Why is John Jones said he had enough? Why does Conor McGregor say thanks for the cheese? Why does Henry Cejudo say that I'm the triple champ and bye-bye, I don't want to fight no more? Why does Nate Diaz, he stays retired, whatever his deal is, right? But there's a reason for all this. There's a reason for all these temper tantrums that were essentially thrown by the major fighters in the UFC, right? So let me give you, and it's all connected, right? So Fight Island, Yas Island, Abu Dhabi, United Arab Emirates, it's going to be a big deal. So the reason why this fight is kind of cool, because it's kind of this mythological thing, you know, from the movies, that Fight Island's going to fight on an island. It's just going to be very interesting, right? It's a cool deal that the UFC set up, Dana White and company put together. So they did that, right? So the reason why that card came to, reason why those cards are coming to fruition is because the United Arab Emirates, they have a tendency to pay and fund these fights, boxing matches, whatever it is, right? Because of the fact that, one, it's a little bit out there. They're not really that known to being a sports destination. However, they do host events and they do fund them, right? For the most part, right? Look at Anthony Joshua in recent history. Anthony Joshua and Andy Ruiz, they fought that fight there. And the pay-per-view numbers do get hurt a little bit because of the fights being out there, because the time zones and everything's kind of out of whack a little bit, right? But the guaranteed money is a huge draw, right? So the UFC is no different. Dana White comes with this idea. I'm sure, you know, he proposes it. They get it all set up. They want more than one fight. And then so they put together this UFC 251 card, which is kind of the shining star of it's going to happen first. Then you have 3 fight nights in Abu Dhabi, right? And so that whole idea happens where UFC 251 is going to be a big card, and it's going to have a bunch of guaranteed money because there's no ticket sales, there's no gate sales in the United States, where all they generate, you know, where the T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas, you know, all these other events they have, there's not going to be any fans, there's not going to be any tickets being sold. So you have to figure out a way to generate money from somewhere else. So UFC, Dana White and company, they come up with this plan. They have these 4 fights there. They have the UFC 251. Then they have basically 4 fights in 2 weeks, right? 4 cards in 2 weeks, right? It jumps off with the UFC 251, where you have Kamaru Usman versus Gilbert Burns fighting. Then you have Alexander Volkanovski versus Max Holloway, Petra Yan versus Jose Aldo, Jessica Andrade versus Ro Namajunas, Amanda Ribas versus Paige Van Zant. Now, it could be argued the reason why all the high profile, you have high profile people here, but you don't have the John Jones, you don't have the Conor McGregor, you don't have the Henry Cejudo, you don't have the Nate Diaz, you don't have the Jorge Masvidals, right? You don't have all these huge giant names that have all said that they retired because they threw a temper tantrum because they couldn't get on some of this guaranteed money. Now, there's a reason for this, okay? There's a reason for that. It's not because the UFC hates them. It's not because they hate John Jones because he's a controversial figure. Oh my God. No, John Jones is loved by the UFC, but he makes a lot of money too. He's an experienced champion who essentially has never lost his belt. Let's just call it what it is. He's lost his belt because of other reasons, but not because of this, right? Then you have Henry Cejudo. Henry Cejudo basically saved his division, went up in weight, won that division. He's a double champ. He's a gold medalist, and so he's a triple champ. He's triple C, bend the knee, this whole thing. He's beating the who's who in his division. He says he retired because he doesn't want any more fights, because he's proved everything he has to prove. No, because they didn't throw him any money and they didn't put him on this 251 card. All these guys were eligible for this UFC 251, which has guaranteed money in it. But Henry Cejudo clearly stated in his podcast with Joe Rogan that he'd come back for Volkanovski, because what do you know? Volkanovski is fighting on this card, right? So Volkanovski he's not making as much as, say, the UFC veterans, or maybe that Henry Cejudo came in, because Henry Cejudo came in as an Olympic champion. And he's done his thing. He beat Demetrius Johnson, who was arguably one of the best, right? So, and Henry Cejudo says he is the greatest athlete of all time. I love it when they do that, because there is no greatest athlete of all time. It's impossible to say, because in the next 5 years, there's going to be the next greatest athlete of all time. So we talked about John Jones. We talked about Henry Cejudo. We talked about Jorge Masvidal. Jorge Masvidal says that he wants more money, pay him what he's worth. Yes, he's a great athlete. He's very entertaining. He's in the spotlight, right? Okay, his contract's coming up. He re-signed. He wants more money. He's one of the guys that say, yeah, I signed for more money, but I still want to negotiate this before I go out there and fight. So he's one of those guys, which is all he should be doing that. All the fighters, if they all negotiated aggressively for their pay, then the pay would inherently go up. It's the people that just take it, right? It's just the way it works, right? It's personalities, the whole psychology of it. But however, so he gets left out of the card, because who is he going to fight? Conor McGregor? Well, Conor McGregor keeps fighting, keeps politicking for this fight. Conor McGregor starts throwing fits in the media, and he's like, he wants to fight in July, because he knows about this guaranteed money thing, and he wants a piece of that pie. Everybody wants that cheesecake, so to say, and everybody wants to get a slice, because the UFC knows that there's going to be a lot of guaranteed money available, even though there's no fans, or if there are fans, it's their fans. You know, it's a weird dynamic, right? So Conor McGregor says, I retired, I have nothing else to prove, thank you for the money. Now, he's the only one that he's got $1 billion, basically, $1 billion company, which he doesn't need the money. He just likes this whole cat and mouse game. It seems like, you know, Conor McGregor, of all these people, seems like he likes it the most, because he has no reason to be fighting anymore. He's made his money. He took advantage of the sport. He's an international superstar. He can do movies. He could do a whole bunch of other stuff. He still likes fighting. So there's them, right? Then you have Nate Diaz, who is always Nate Diaz. Nate Diaz is doing his thing. I don't know what's going on with him, but he's up for a good fight. So it was either him, Jorge Masvidal, or Nate Diaz. All those three guys are high-profile guys that can sell a bunch of pay-per-view tickets when it doesn't matter that you're selling tickets, because that's a guaranteed card, essentially, right? The United Emirates, they're funding this thing, right? Abu Dhabi, Yas Island, they're funding it. So this is UFC's opportunity to make some money when the money's thin. So what do? You get Kamaru Usman, who probably doesn't have the biggest contract. Gilbert Burns for sure doesn't have a giant contract. Volkanovski doesn't have a giant contract. Holloway, he's probably getting paid some good money, but he's not up there, right? He's probably getting paid really good money, but he's not the top earners. He's not those guys that I just talked about who all said that they retired, essentially. They threw a fit. They couldn't get on UFC 251 because UFC is not that they don't want them to fight. This is where they need to make some of their money back. Everybody says, Ruben, you can't do that. Ruben, you can't say that. You sound like you're anti-fighter, Ruben. You say that you don't want the fighters. You just think it's all about the UFC. No, dude. The UFC needs to make money just like the fighters need to make money. Everybody needs to make money. Who gets what is a different story, right? The breakdown of the pay is where we can go back and forth with the whole thing. However, if you are the organization, wouldn't you think it's in your best interest to not only try to recoup some of this money that you've been burning through, that you spent $100 million on the APEC Institute, that all this stuff that you're burning money through, because for us to be disingenuous and say that the UFC hasn't taken massive hits, it's wrong. There's a bunch of fight cards that didn't go on, a bunch of gates, a bunch of cities, a bunch of, all this other stuff, a bunch of money that did not get generated. Right? Fighters didn't make money either. Everybody's hurting. But if you're the owner of the UFC, obviously you want to try to structure this so you can keep the fights coming up. We don't know what type of financial position the UFC is actually in. Now, they have big deals, they generate a bunch of income, but for us to say that, oh, they have money, it doesn't matter, let's hold the brakes on that, all right? Let's be careful on this. The reason why I'm making this video, because nobody that's affiliated with the UFC is going to talk about this. That's the reason why I'm making this video, because I don't work for the UFC. I don't work for anybody. I'm my own media thing here. I could do what I want. So that's why you don't hear none of this scuttle out there, because there's a reasoning why. So all the tantrums that got thrown, and here's another reason why I know I'm right, is you look at all the people that are fighting. Rose Namajunas, she's kind of coming back. She was messed up. She was kind of in flux right now. Jessica Andrade's always been kind of a mid-level fighter. She's very talented. They're all very talented. Paige Van Zandt is the last person on the main card because she's a celebrity. If she had more wins in the UFC, and I'm not saying that her wins are not valuable. Nobody's discrediting the quality of fighting, okay? None of this is discrediting the quality of the fighters and the fighting. If she had more wins, this is a critique. That's all this is. This is a casual person's observation critique of it, is that she would be more in the limelight. She would have probably been left out of this fight card too. I'm not saying that these other fighters have less value. All I'm saying is where their contract is and where they are contractually is different than these other superstars. The superstars carry the fight cards, but they belong on headlining cards by themselves on a pay-per-view where you sell out the arena and you generate money for everybody else. So these fight cards are not for them. Now, they're going to paint a different picture. They have to paint the UFC as being a bad guy because everybody's saying, why aren't they fighting? Why aren't they fighting? Why aren't they fighting? There's a reason for that. There's nobody to sell tickets to right now. The United States is one of the biggest markets they have, and they can't have any big events over here. So the fact that the UFC is putting these events on, and somehow Dana White and company found money, let's give them credit, they found money in the United Arab Emirates and Abu Dhabi at Yas Island, and so by them finding the money, kudos to them, right? Obviously, we would have liked to seen all the big fighters. So if you would have let Conor McGregor on this card, let's face it, he would have took up all the money and all these other big names. Because look at that card stacked. Kamaru Usman, Alexander Volkanovski, Max Holloway, Peter Yan, Jose Aldo, Jessica Andrade, Rose Namajunas, Amanda Ribas, Paige Van Zandt. Those are all interesting fights I want to see. If there was the Conor McGregor, Nate Diaz fight, Conor McGregor, Jorge Masvidal fight, it would have been a heavily stacked card for just the main event. It wouldn't have been not entertaining because all fights are entertaining. I love watching all the UFC fights. But let's face it, if you'd had those two guys on there, right? Or if you would have had John Jones fighting DC for the mega belt, for the heavyweight championship belt, whatever the heck that is, there's nobody to buy tickets. You're not offsetting the cost. You're not offsetting the revenue. These guys, if their main card, big heavyweights, in terms of, publicity and popularity, you want them to get on a pay-per-view so they could get a cut of the revenue. If these things are not selling any tickets or the pay-per-view numbers are down, let's face it, you really don't want to be on there. I'm not saying these other fighters, I'm not saying Kamaru Usman is a champion, but he's not as popular as those other people. Let's just call it what it is. It's not that he's not an amazing fighter. He's amazing. He's a popular celebrity. He has what it takes. He's the guy. But he ain't, let's face it, he's not Conor McGregor level. He's not John Jones. John Jones has been a champion. Like nobody even remembers when he wasn't a champion. That's how long that guy's been dominant. So let's hold the brakes on saying, Kamaru Usman, he got shortchanged. No, dude, he's getting a payday. Like they all need to get paydays. Everybody needs to get paid. But more importantly, we need to keep the lights on so we can keep on having these events. Now, July seems like it's going to be shaping up. August, September, October, it seems like we're going to start having people in the stands. Disneyland is opening up in middle of July, so that's a good sign, right? That tells us that people in the know are figuring stuff out. So that's the reason why fighters threw tantrums in the last month, and everybody said they retired because they don't want to fight because they got skipped over because their salaries are too high. They don't need to be fighting when there's no fans in the stands. That's the way it works. This model will come back. We will get back to promising. Conor McGregor will fight again. Henry Cejudo will fight again. Volkanovski, it would be an interesting fight if we saw Henry Cejudo fighting Volkanovski, and I don't want to see Henry Cejudo fight for the 155 belt right away. I don't want to see that. He's got to fight one person. Maybe he can fight Nate Diaz. How about Nate Diaz versus Henry Cejudo? Let's make that fight happen at 155. Pay him a ton of money. UFC, blah, blah, blah. Headlining the card. Give him some pay-per-view money. And they both get paid. Then if he wins that fight, if he can get through the craziness that is Nate Diaz, because you never know with that guy, then he can get and have a fight with Volkanovski, and they all can get paid. Right? So that's kind of my thought process behind this whole thing. It's the reason why I wanted to make this video, because nobody's talking about this. These temper tantrums temper tantrums that these fighters are giving, it's a false narrative. They're playing the WWE card where they're like, I'm so upset. Nobody wants to let me fight. If I'm not going to fight, I'm going to throw a tantrum. Okay, go retire and disappear off into the mist. I hate to see everybody go because they're all very entertaining to me. However, if we understand the logic behind it, is that this is on purpose. There's a mechanism in place here where they are putting themselves out there like this because they couldn't get some of that money that's available. It's slim pickings right now, and the UFC has to really think about themselves when they're deciding where they're going with these fights, right? So they have to be smart about it. Let's just face it. They have to be smart about it, right? The other fight cards, let's look at them, right? So let's look at them. You got, they haven't even announced who they're going to fight. Those fights are going to, they're going to put in there. And then here's where it's making sense what I'm saying. August 15th, that's going to be the next pay-per-view, UFC 252. What do you have? Stipe versus Cormier 3. That's a big money fight. DC gets paid a ton of dough. DC is one of their top fighters. And the reason why I didn't bring up DC is DC has already said this is probably his last fight ever. However, John Jones versus DC for the heavyweight title is something that I think everybody would pay to see. That will be a tremendous fight because if DC can beat him, he retire and that's it. He goes on the, that's a swan song. That's the perfect fairy tale Disney story, right? Although, it'd be on a Disney Channel, ESPN. So anyways, that's my thoughts about this whole thing. UFC 251 is shaping up to be a very interesting situation. The UFC is managing to stay in the media. It's a very interesting concept. All these fighters throwing hissy fits. It makes perfect sense when you look at it this way. They wanted some of that Yas Island, Fight Island, United Arab Emirates, Abu Dhabi money, and nobody got any. They got shut out. How powerful is that, right? How smart is that for the UFC? And another reason why I know this makes sense is because just today, Dana White goes, tell Jorge Masvidal if he wants to fight, all he has to do is pick up the phone. So that tells you can't fight on the United Emirates, Arab Emirates, Yas Island, Abu Dhabi card because we got to make some of this money back, right? We got a gajillion employees. We got obligations. We're going to put on 4 fight cards in 2 weeks. Cut me some slack here. Jorge Masvidal, now that it's over, Conor McGregor is going to get talked to again. They're going to bring him out of retirement. Jorge Masvidal, let's get that fight going. Let's do it at, Cowboy Stadium in 2 months, 3 months. Hold the buzz. You're going to get paid more than you would have got paid if you would have fought in July. Jorge Masvidal, the money's coming, okay? They need you. Stop saying you're going to retire. Henry Cejudo, cut it out, dude. You want to go into real estate? You got a girlfriend? Okay, I get it. What are we going to do here? You're good at fighting. You're a champion. You got the 3 C's, the bend the knee. You can make the pillows with the people you defeat. You kick them. You put them in a trash bag and you kick them and all that stuff like that. All that stuff's entertaining, dude. Cut it out, dude. Cut it out. You went on Joe Rogan. You gave the whole secret of how basically you became a robot. You gave the whole secret about, John Jones. He always got problems. John Jones gets in trouble because nobody's talking about him. That's how he stays relevant. He's upset because he's not getting these giant paydays. Yes, they all deserve to get paid. Everybody deserves to get paid a ton of money. I agree with that 100%. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. The UFC controls all these contracts and they're in the driver's seat. So they're going to do what's going to keep them in the forefront of what's going on. And the reason why nobody's talking about this because this destroys the narrative of all the fighters. The UFC hates me. The UFC's the enemy. The UFC, they're so bad and evil. Blah, 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 blah. Come on, man. If the UFC was bad and evil, then it's like a giant organization now. There were no fighters making money. They don't make enough money. Yes, rookie fighters, guess what? Your first contract in the NBA, they don't make a lot of money. They make more money because it's an established league that's been around for 60, 70 years. The NFL's been around for over 100 years. The Major League Baseball's been around for over 130 years. The UFC's been around for like 20 years. You think the UFC is all of a sudden going to have these, legacy, you know, the UFC, excuse me, the UFC doesn't even have their own arenas. They have the Apex Center, which they first created, but it would be interesting if the UFC had their own arenas. If they have they had the UFC arena, a giant arena that they just have exclusively for UFC fights. It's interesting how they don't have that. So the expense, so in other words, if you made the UFC arena, they have the money to do that. You could do the UFC arena in Los Angeles, in New York, in Texas. You could do it where there's a lot of people, and you can have concerts there. You can do a whole bunch of other stuff. And it could be dedicated to having these UFC cards, and that's where you can get more money for the fighters. Because the rent that they have to pay, these agreements they have, costs a lot of money. Now, initially, that would be an investment, but now you start making arenas throughout the world, throughout the country. You make one in United Emirates. You made a state. What if you made a stadium there? What if you made a stadium in Ireland, in England, in Africa, in China, in Japan, United States, in Mexico? What if you had stadiums all over the world and you controlled those stadiums and you ran concerts through there, you did a whole bunch of events there, and you had a self-sustaining system? That would be more feasible to me in the UFC if that's what you do, because then you could pay your fighters more, because now you own these stadiums and you can charge, you know, the rent, cost of the building. It's tangible assets. In the long run, you can sell that stadium to whoever, a soccer organization, a basketball. You could do whatever you want with it. But the point is that you can sell them and they're tangible assets. That's where I think the UFC is missing the boat. But we're kind of digressing. We're kind of getting off of topic of the fact that UFC is having this Fight Island thing, which is very interesting, very, very interesting, and I want to see it, you know, and I'm in. UFC 251, I'm in. I'm gonna watch it, but all these fighters throwing tantrums, cool your jets. I understand why everybody did that, because they didn't get any of that Abu Dhabi money, but there's gonna be money in the future, so we're all gonna be interested to watch. Enough with the retirement talk, okay? I don't want to fight no more. Come on, you guys like this video? Tell me what you guys think. It's gonna be in podcast form. The Ghetto Eagle podcast, this will be in podcast form. That's why I'm recording it and all that good stuff, that with the good audio and so forth and so on. But it'll be on Spotify, Apple, iTunes, Google Podcasts. It's going to be all the other stuff. Check it out. I'll put the links on there later. Tell me what you guys think. Hit me up. Thanks.